All right, hello and welcome. So, I just finished my part one Ironman of Fire Emblem Vision Quest. This makes my fourth run through part one. I've done it on normal mode twice, hard mode twice. I've also done a very quick run through easy just to double check some stealables to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything. And I'm starting to get a pretty good feel for what units are really, really important to the part and what units are less so. And wanted to just go ahead and put my thoughts out. I will try to do a part two and part, three and four if we get there. So these are just kind of my thoughts through the game. I guess I should start, before I do that, I'll start my tiering philosophy, which is generally in the vein of, does this character make the game easier? I'm not super concerned with playing fast, though units that enable you to play fast are going to naturally rise up in your tier list, because once you start to get a handle on the game, you're going to try to complete maps a little quicker. And Iron Man's kind of reward more deliberate play on average, but I will always keep in mind units that let you play faster, because usually the units that let you play faster are units that are good in combat, or they have really good mobility, or other things that will make them just generically quite good. So I do penalize units for having really, really restrictive join costs. I don't think that's something, a lot of tier lists are like, oh, I'm not going to penalize you for costing 10,000 gold or something, but I absolutely will. And I'm kind of trying to divide them into tiers of kind of like, your S tier, your absolute unique units. These are the ones that if you lose them, you're going to have a bad time. Your A tier are like kind of the core of the experience. They're really important. They're great units, either in the short run or they're good long-term projects. B tend to be your role player units that serve very specific functions and do like really solid work. They could be good long-term or great or good short-term. These are all decent units. C is like kind of your filler tier. You'll use these guys while they're good, and then eventually you may drop them. D is bad filler. These units typically get cut or don't show up enough in the part to actually matter. The outclassed F tier are only going to be units that are outclassed, right? These are units that there's no real reason to deploy them, or they don't really contribute very much, or take time and investment energy in order to use. So starting off in the S tier, we've got the Bolero Ballers. Larissa sits at the top of this tier. She's the best unit in part one. In most maps, she's going to be one of your better, or if not your outright best combat unit. And by the end of the part, once she gets a promotion, she's going to be super, super bulky. Even in hard mode where things are doubling her, she often takes less damage from a double than most units would just taking a hit. She gets a number of good, effective weaponry items that she can utilize if she wants. And once she promotes to general, and this Armor Knights have 5 movement and generals get 6, so they have standard infantry movement, which means that their great bulk can actually be utilized, which they're very, very powerful, and specifically Larissa is. Total weapon triangle control once she gets later into the game and promotes, as well as a cracked out personal spear that she gets in Chapter 7X, all contribute to making her one of the best units in the game. Part 1 also really plays to her strength. There aren't a ton of open maps. There's a lot of maps with lanes and hallways that she can kind of partially or completely block off. She's really useful in Chapter 4 to pull the red gem Myrmidon with a killing edge. She's the only unit that can do so safely. All your other units are threatening getting one-rounded by this unit off of a crit. And so I think she provides pretty unique utility because she could do a number of these kind of pulls. And just in general will be really good at setting up pulls on bosses. In hard mode, some of them can double in one rounder, but not a lot of them can. It's a few of them, like Chapter 8's boss can, for example. So yeah, fantastic unit. Use her to make your time a lot easier, especially if you're playing hard mode. All right. So S-Sphere is going to be next up. And I think her main thing is she's your best combat unit for several chapters. She eventually does fall off, but she's a thief, so she remains valuable throughout the run. I'm giving her partial credit for every chest gotten before Chapter 9 because you only have one thief and you do get chest keys, but they can be a little bit limiting in the way you can utilize them. Esther's pass ability and lockpicks make her very, very flexible in getting those. And you kind of want to hold on to some of these chest keys to use on the later maps where you might need to race some thieves. So while you could just chest key most everything, I think in part 1, you're not doing it for free. But more importantly, she has a lot of stealables, including a very valuable red gem in Chapter 4 that I mentioned on that Myrmidon. You need to steal this to make sure your economy is going to be functional. She can get access to a couple of teal gems from other steals early in the chapters. In hard mode specifically, she can steal a number of vulneraries in the early portion of the game. Those aren't really going to be necessary in your other modes. But in hard mode, if you can get 1 or 2 extra vulneraries, you're going to use them. The items are great and your units take a lot of damage, so any turn they can use healing themselves is really valuable. Additionally, she steals an angelic robe in chapter 7 potentially. She gets a very easy steal on an energy ring in chapter 7XX, and also steals a secret book and a red gem in chapter 8. You could potentially steal 2, though that is not the easiest. And if she were to be dead in chapter 9, it would be difficult to get all of the chests, which include things like a master seal to promote your units, as well as a couple of other decent items. She's pretty important for making sure you get all of the treasure in chapters 10 and endgame, as well as chapter 9. I don't remember if all of these chapters give you enough chest keys to open them up, even if you wanted to. And while after chapter 9, you have Otalie, who could get partial credit for these, I think Esphere is still extremely valuable since she has provided so much already and probably has gotten some XP and will be just better. Otalie, generally speaking, is just a worse version of Esphere. And doesn't have the pass skill, which is pretty noticeable as well. All right, and that takes us to the last member of the S tier. I originally had Natsuko at the top of A, but I think her unique utility is pushing her up a tier. She provides really great value with her unrestricted flying movement. She's probably your best combat unit on her join chapter because of her Lady Blade. And while I can't give her total credit for that because you could just trade it off to like Esphere or Storch potentially and just one round a bunch of enemies anyways, the fact that she comes in with it and they start out several turns from getting to her means that she's going to get a couple of rounds of combat, and you want to put your XP on your early flyer anyways. So killing off the brigands in that chapter, including the boss, as well as there's a number of enemies in chapter 3 and several in chapter 4, including the boss, who with a little bit of chip damage, Natsuko can one round. Moving into hard mode, she still is incredible. And enemies become a lot more dangerous, so there's a certain value she has, as well as the only high resistance unit you get in the first 6 or 7 chapters of the game until you get Gunner, but she's still better at this job than Gunner, of being able to reliably kill mages. I think the mage killer thing is a little bit overblown by some of the more casual members of the Fire Emblem community who really value that. But Pegasuses are good at dealing with them, even if they have one range. You'll obviously need a little bit of help to clear out any archers that could threaten her, and she lacks one rounding capability, especially in hard mode, until she promotes and gets an energy ring and some other stat boosters. But she's worth all of this because of the unique early flyer contribution she gets and her own incredible speed stat if you need it. I usually give her the early talisman to get her resistance so high that even in hard mode, the mages and sage shamans are dealing like 3 to 4 damage to her, and she'll be able to take the hit and then fly over and kill them. Moving into the A tier, I've got Storch up here at the top, and that could be a little bit high for his part 1 contributions, though I think they're quite noticeable. So first of all, Storch, just by being on the field, gives +5 hit and 3 avoid to all of your units, though I'm assuming the hack in some ways was built a little bit around that. It's still something that he's force deployed, but if he wasn't, you would still consider deploying him for that. His own personal skill, Charisma, also gives an additional +10 hit and avoid to units within 3 spaces of him, and it's sort of difficult to quantify how much that's going to impact any individual round, unless it's pushing it from, the 90s up to a 100% where it becomes completely reliable. That being said, I have to assume over the many rounds of combat that units buffed by Charisma are going to get in part 1, that it's going to nudge some RNs in your favor, whether that's giving you a dodge or getting you a hit here or there, and anything that boosts reliability is still valuable, especially in the context of Ironman or in hard mode where the hit rates get a little bit shaky. Storch's Cat's Balger is also really great. It's a cracked out rapier that allows him to one round basically every cavalier you're going to come across, even in hard mode. He'll usually one tap those and still one round most of the generals. Storch's combat really isn't that great overall though in part 1. He's a decent combat unit, but he is an infantry unit that's not super bulky and is locked most of the time to one range unless you give him the light brand or if you get the thunder sword in chapter 10, but that is very late into the part. That being said, I still think he's probably contributes enough given that you have him literally the entire run and he's using Charisma and Cat's Balger to make a number of kills. So I think all of that puts him into A tier. However, I expect him to go up. He will be S tier by the end of the run because Storch's promotion is crazy. It's one of the wildest promotions in the game, and he gets basically +3 to every stat, except for movement. And if you aren't going to boots your dancer, or you aren't going to boots like a wyvern or something, I think Storch is probably the best candidate for boots just because he's so strong. He's one of those units that can just dive into a pile of enemies, even on harder difficulties, not a late game, and just kind of come out on top. In normal mode, you could literally fight off like 5 enemies with a high level Storch. He's a very, very strong unit, and overall, I think deserves his place here. So I do have Nazar here at the second slot. You get him in Chapter 4. He'll be your best axe user immediately. He does great damage. He's got good speed. He comes with a hammer, which is awesome. You can give him Moonrazor on the same chapter. And then he gets to kill shamans and wreck them in Chapter 6 and 7X. That being said, we made some mistakes. We didn't account for a wyvern. And then we lost like 4 50-50s in a row. So our Nazar and our Moonrazor and our hammer all went in the trash can. Really unfortunate. He was shaping up to be a great unit. He was getting great level ups, which he usually does, and then he died. His speed's not good enough to double everything, but it'll double most of the things that matter. He really just actually factually one-taps a lot of enemies in part 1 if they're squishy, and if they're slow, he does probably double. Great unit. Shame that he died. Ruslan's up here in the A tier as well. Partly he is here because he comes in Chapter 8, meaning he only has Chapter 9, Chapter 10, and Chapter in-game, one in-game, as well as Chapter 8 to contribute. He does join at the very beginning of Chapter 8, so he even gets to participate in battle prep, so you can equip him with items. Ruslan has reposition on a flyer, which instantly makes him bare minimum low A, high B, even if he had 0 in every stat. Reposition is just that useful when you've got it on a 7-8 move flyer. That being said, his combat's okay. He's very fast. His strength's a little low. He doesn't have axes. He always seems to be just a little short of killing things, but he's decently bulky. So the fact that he's able to contribute decent combat and has an incredibly good personal skill make him an A tier unit, I think, for part 1. He will probably move up going forward. Part of it is his availability, though. He does miss, because he joins in Chapter 7, he misses Chapters 1 through 7, as well as 2 Gaiden chapters, so 9 chapters altogether. If you thought he joined late, Helga and Titus don't join until Chapter 9. I'm sorry. Ruslan gets, Chapter 8, Chapter 9, Chapter 10, Chapter 11, and then Endgame, right? Because it's the Jailer's Malice, then the 10th chapter. Oh no, then the, I'm sorry, not the 10th chapter, the 4th chapter, the 10th chapter, sieging the castle and killing Graydon are the chapters. So he actually gets one more than I mentioned originally. Anyways, Helga gets one less than that. Titus gets one less than that. That being said, they're both really, really good units. Helga, we gave a speed wing to, and now she's got like 16 strength, 16 speed pre-promotion. It is just wild. Just one rounds everything. You don't have to give speed wing to Helga, but it is a good way to get her snowballing, since her only real weakness is the fact that she's a little bit slow. And so she doesn't double everything. And by giving her a speed wing, she doubles everything and snowballs experience and really just starts to hard carry the run for a while. One of the best units in the game, probably will make it up into the S tier by the end of it. And then Titus, I've got him below Helga because I think his contributions are a little lower, though I would probably deploy him before Helga if I was forced to choose, would I? Not 100% sure about that. He passively, just by existing on the field, provides 10 hit and 6 avoid to all of your units with 2 leadership stars. Additionally, he comes with a Dire Thunder and a Bolting Tome. The Dire Thunder is his personal weapon, and the Bolting Tome might as well be because I doubt Lyra is going to have the weapon ranks to even use it. She doesn't have Titus's really high magic stat. Bolting isn't super useful, but it does let you tactically delete an enemy like 2/3 of the time, which comes up a couple of times through part 1 where I needed to just kill an enemy because we had a bad dodge or something, or, we were in a sketchy situation and we just deleted a unit off the map. Dire Thunder is also a delete button. It's one of the reasons why Titus's combat is excellent in part 1. Enemies have really low resistance and Titus just claps them in the face for, an automatic double. His speed is really bad though. And so once his Dire Thunder breaks, his combat's all downhill. He's going to cap well before his promotion, which will occur several chapters into part 2. So once he's capped, he'll be sitting around probably for a chapter or 2 at max without being able to get any XP for the things that he's doing. Additionally, though, he does get staffs when he promotes, so he'll maintain his relevancy as a high chip damage / staff bot. Moving into the B tier, these are units that are either good short-term or decent long-term projects. They can go either way. I think all these units are good, but I think their unique contributions are a little bit lower than those in the A tier. So at the top of B tier, I actually have Bosco. I originally had him in the C tier for filler, but I was recently replaying through hard mode and was reminded of just how good this unit is, especially when units are bulky. He's one of the only units in my army on that hard mode file that can punch for so much. So while I actually didn't use him that much in the Ironman run, he is a valuable unit for his damage. He basically has like 18 strength. So he's a great unit for the higher difficulty of hard mode, being able to punch through those beefy enemies for a while. If you can ever get him doubling, which is kind of difficult, his speed, growth, and base are not incredible. They're decent enough to not get doubled for most things, but he's not going to be doubling a lot. If you get him there, he will just be absolutely a player phase delete button, though. He's very, very powerful, and he's the best of the soldiers that you get in probably any GBA game that I can think of, like any of these GBA Romhacks I've played. Outside of maybe Jaka from Onderon Saga, who's also kind of a lord in that game, so that doesn't even really count. That takes us to Dewey, who I think is probably the next best unit in the B tier. A bounce around originally had her as high as A tier, but I don't think she's 2 tiers above the other staff users. I think she is a noticeable amount better because of her ability to ride around on a horse to get to anybody, rescue drop people, and just generally all that horse Kanto utility is super valuable. That being said, there's not much to say about Dewey. She's a staff bot, and she has a passive heal to all of your nearby units, which is surprisingly valuable. It doesn't seem particularly impactful, but it did on several occasions give us the opportunity to take a round of combat that we otherwise wouldn't have got. Especially on hard mode, you start noticing it where your enemy is going to hit for 15 and you basically everything gets 2-tapped, right? And Dewey's heal can sometimes push it over that 2-hit threshold so that they can take another hit. You notice that quite a bit. Not something you can rely on or anything, but it's a happy little accident when it occurs. Sri is unfortunately another unit who died. I think he is a solid bow user. He died on his join chapter because we had some bad RNG and I kept going for a play that I should have backed out of and ended up having to sacrifice him. Yeah, so that was not great. I probably could have played that a little cleaner. And we did have, again, some bad RNG on that chapter, though I'm not going to complain about my RNG too much because I didn't mention it, but Natsuko dodged death like 5 times and Ruslan also did a time or two. So give and take on the RNG. But Sri's decent. Got Kanto for rescue shenanigans. Does pretty good chip damage, probably going to come in with better stats than Vegalus. Yeah, good unit. On hard mode, his killer bow is awesome because it gives him like a 1 in 3 chance of just deleting things off the map. Not too much to say. He's on a horse. He does good chip damage, and those are both things that you like in part 1. Lajos is next, and I think he is the most reliable chip damage unit in the game. He has like 165 hit because of his plus 30 hit on player phase. He joins in chapter 8, so that's why he doesn't rank any higher. And he's not a great long-term unit. He doesn't have great growths, but he is just a pretty solid pre-promote unit to help do good chip damage. He doubles a lot of things. So fast, accurate, good chip damage. What more do you want? And then finally there's Sarka, and was debating between putting her at the top of C tier or the bottom of B tier. She joins with only 2 chapters of availability. Her contributions are not incredible because of that. Her combat is really good though. She has 19 speed, Silver Lance with an A rank weapon rank, as well as 13 strength, which lets her just delete things. She's kind of squishy, but she's just a good, solid unit who you can use until other people outclass her. Like I said, probably move her to the top of C tier. Marlon was busy being pretty good for like 6 or 7 chapters. Maybe a little less than that, like 5 chapters. That's probably fair. I might do some more tweaking here. Because I actually think she probably contributes less than Marlon, despite her being very good. That being said, on the 2 chapters she's there, she is like your best combat unit, or one of your best combat units. The Silver Lance lets her actually just delete a couple of pre-promotes with her high speed. You know what? I am going to put her at the bottom of B tier. I think her contributions on those 2 maps are really important, particularly the Bishop/Sniper that are near Leslie. I think are super valuable for being able to kill those. This is one that I go back and forth on. I could see it being either of those. It feels weird to have the C tier be this big because I think all these units are just fine. Yeah, I'm just going to leave her here. I think she kind of has a Goto energy where she can make sure that you are able to get through part 1. Marlon headlines the C tier. He comes in on chapter 3. He's got a great personal weapon in the Brother Sword that allows him to do like 1.5 Iron Sword hits on average if he hits both of them, and also gives him 2 defensive resistance, which makes him pretty bulky with his bases. That being said, Marlon needs some good level ups and only has a 35% speed growth, which means he's very frequently going to start falling behind. His Brother Sword breaks, he no longer doubles, and then he's like kind of bad. If you do get a good Marlin, he is a potential candidate for a speed wing. You can give him a promotion, he gets some more speed, and then he'll start doubling things. So if you get some good speed growth, consider investing in this unit. I do think he's good if he gets the growths. Like, he is on a great class. You get him super early, so you can invest. You'll always get a chance to see if he's going to pan out or not. I just think he less often than you would like ends up panning out because of that low speed growth. Vagalus is here as another unit that unfortunately bit the dust. That being said, he's a pretty solid chip unit. That's really what he does. For first few chapters, he's good filler chip damage until like chapter 7. Not much to say. Like, I think his contributions are good, but you very frequently drop him. He doesn't, like, his growths are okay. He's on an okay class if he can get a promotion, but he's competing with a lot of other better units. So I think overall, totally fine unit. Osane is next in the C tier. Osane is a staff bot. I think she's a little better than Onisum. I don't think either of them are comparative with Dewey. I think Osane has substantially better long-term viability though, because I think her mage class just gives her better damage and better magic, which means better warp and rescue if you want to be doing that. She also has the Anathema personal skill that I consider pretty good. All in all, I could also see her taking the place at like the very top of the C tier, because I think she's kind of close. And it could be argued that she contributed more than Sarka, so maybe that was like, maybe we would do this. This feels a little weird, but like maybe this makes more sense. Maybe like this actually. I think there has to be like a full tier or near a full tier separating these two units, because I do think Dewey's a lot better. Maybe something like this works though. I kind of like still tweaking some of these slots. Really the only ones I care about are if a unit too much or if a unit's going to be moving up or down an entire tier. In any case, Gunner is also in this sort of filler tier. He joins on chapter 7, near the end of the chapter. He's great if you're having difficulty killing the two bosses, though Natsuko destroys them. If for whatever reason Natsuko is dead, Gunner's a way to make sure you can complete the chapter. You give him a barrier or a pure water, you stick him in front of the mobs, and then he 2-rounds them. His personal skill allows him to get essentially 15 hit in melee range. Sounds really good on paper, and it is good for him personally, but using it as a utility skill is really difficult since he lacks Canto or a high movement to be able to set those up. And most of the time, whatever unit you're adjacent to, you're just going to be smacking. So it's more of a, he gets plus 15 hit. Onisum is rounding out the bottom of the C tier. I'm not going to put him into bad filler, though I usually drop him. I don't think he's super good. That being said, he's okay. His personal skill, Spur Resistance, is really bad because you're not going to be able to set up a lot of spots where you pull a mage, and also the two units you have that have enough resistance to actually take advantage of this are both sword locked for the entire portion of part 1. So you're not going to be able to counterattack. It's really difficult to actually take advantage of this because of mage's 1-2 range. If they can get to Onisum, they'll usually just attack him since he can't retaliate. That being said, if you're playing sloppy, he's got decent bulk, and he's a good backup healer to have access to. He does also get chapters 4, 5, and 6. He is your only healer. Does that make him more valuable than Gunner? Probably. Probably makes him more valuable than Gunner. Don't think it makes him more valuable than Marlin, though. Marlin's combat is pretty decent in the early game with the Brother Sword. So I think I'm going to move this. I've moved Gunner down. He was near like the A tier at one point, and I just more I think about it, the more I keep finding reasons to like drop his combat. You know, he's decently fast, but he doesn't have any really unique standout traits. He's kind of like got Deke energy, where he just like joins. He's pretty good for a while, and then eventually you find better units, and you can use him if you want, but like his long-term viability is not great. All right, and then we get into the D tier. Kind of reluctant to put Arcady here after my last Ironman run where he became one of our better units. That being said, even after promoting him, I'm pretty sure like he's not even our third best unit anymore. He had a really great set of growths for a while though, where he hit just like strength and speed for several levels. And we gave him a promotion, got him up to like 13, 14 strength, 14, 15 speed, and he just like doubles everything, 1-rounds everything, kind of frail. So we're using him, and it's redeemed him a little bit in my eye and kept him out of the F tier. That being said, he's not super good, but he also has several chapters of free deployment before you start getting so many units you have to make decisions. And in that time, he will contribute. And that keeps him out of the F tier because all the F tier units are units that you are not going to deploy. They all lack free deployment chapters, essentially. Lyra's in the similar boat. I think she is worse than Arcady, though, because I think she has better long-term potential, but I don't think it's good enough that you're really going to not drop her in most spots. I've used her in my first playthrough and really never gotten her to be good since. Usually she's going to come outclassed by a unit we get relatively early into part 2. She does have a decent support with Marlin, but I'm not going to say that salvages them. And I think she just provides acceptable chip damage for a few chapters, and then you eventually just bench her, because even though she hits on resistance, which is usually a good thing, her magic stat tends to be kind of crappy. She needs kind of get the gross to pop off, and even after all that, she's just okay. And finally, at the bottom of the bad filler tier, I have Duck. I originally had him in the F tier as well, but I do think he provides a little bit of contribution on 11 and endgame. Because he joins on turn 2 or 3 of the part, he's able to contribute relatively early into it. He's got decent bulk, which is nice. And then on chapter 11, he provides some more rescue/chip damage support, and I think that keeps him out of being completely useless, since I did deploy him with the extra deployment slots that endgame chapter. I don't think he's good, not got the best stats. He's like okay at best, and we're probably going to drop him. But for part 1, he did stay out of the useless tier because he did get some contribution in, and I did deploy him for 1 extra chapter. All right, so then we've come to Ottilie, and I think she probably is the most valuable of the F tier squad. She joins in chapter 9. And she helps with getting some of the chests there, and she becomes the main gouch that you can use on her or Esphere to give a bunch of luck and help with their avoid. That's about it. I don't see a lot of reason to use her over Esphere, though she does come in relatively comparable. Maybe she's a better growth unit or something. I don't know. I don't care about my Thief's combat stats anyways. Esphere has a really high level and thus has like decent HP, decent bulk. Also, I have some personal animosity to Ottilie because I have played hard mode. And in hard mode, for whatever reason, she has gotten hit by like 1 to 2% crits way too many times, and it has caused me to restart a chapter. So I just have a personal bias against her. There's also Honeydew, and I think Honeydew is in a weird spot in that I actually think the unit is totally fine. But for this part specifically, she joins at the end of chapter 9, right? It's going to be close to the end, so all the actual combat is done. So any contribution she does on that chapter is going to be trying to funnel XP into her to catch her up. She has the Nihil skill, which could be quite useful. I assume it turns off Graydon's anti-effective weaponry. So if you were able to grind her up, promote her, and then have her fight Graydon with like a hammer or an armor slayer, she might be able to do some good work there. But outside of like potential LTC things where like maybe that lets us do like some sort of warp rescue shenanigans to LTC the chapter, I don't know how important that actually ends up being. Otherwise, you have to deploy her against an army that has got a bunch of good units at this point, and she doesn't bring anything particularly unique. She's got like 10 strength and 15 speed, so she is fast, but she's weighed down a little bit by most axes until promotion at least, and just kind of ends up feeling like Arcady if you didn't raise him. It just basically would be like the same unit with a better skill. So I do think she's totally usable, but I'm putting her down here because she doesn't contribute anything meaningful in a normal run. Though again, if Nihil does work on Graydon, I think she is a way of reliably being able to kill him. You might need to burn an Earth Seal, an early promoter to do so, but that could allow you to use effective weaponry to actually kill him, which is, I'm going to take note of that, and I will try to see on my next playthrough if that's something that's feasible. And if it is, I would probably bump her into D tier because that is a meaningful contribution that these other units don't do. Hollis and Zoya, I'm just kind of ranking them together. They both suck. Hollis is just a bad Larissa. Zoya is a bad boss cow. Hollis doesn't get a bunch of free chapters to gain XP. He doesn't get a cracked out personal weapon, and he doesn't have 1-2 range and is on a bad weapon type and has bad stats. He is just a really bad unit, and I don't like his personality. You recruit him. His most meaningful contribution is he attacked a wall and then went to a shop. Yeah, that's about it. Zoya did even less than that. Zoya, in theory, is like a support unit where she has the spur strength, which gives +3 strength to nearby units. But she's on a class that wants to be in the front lines of combat. She doesn't have Canto, doesn't have 7 movement. You put her on a horse, she'd be pretty good, but she's footlocked. I don't know if Zoya's like literally the worst unit in the part, but she literally contributed nothing. I guess like I would probably deploy her before Hollis. In most cases, maybe if Larissa died, I would deploy Hollis just as like a replacement unit. All right, so those are my thoughts. I keep tweaking this tier list ever so slightly, kind of trying to measure how much a unit's contributions in part 1 are impacting it. So let me know what you think. Like, have you played Vision Quest? What do you think? Are these reasonable assertions for, the first part of the game? Like, what would you change? Yeah, let me know. I'm going to try to start part 2 here before too much longer, and I will try to have all of part 1 up on YouTube here soon. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.